Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third session of Teal Table Talk here at the Spina Bifida Association for Greater New England. I'm Ginny Briggs, and I'm your executive director. And the topic this week is parenting a child with spina bifida. And I want to start by thanking our sponsors once again for making all of this programming possible for all of us. So our silver sponsor this year is Coloplast. Our bronze sponsors are Boston Children's Hospital Neurosurgery Foundation, Mass General Hospital for Children, Hollister, Permobile, Mobility Works, and our friend level sponsor is National Seating and Mobility. So thank you again very much to all of them. Their support is tremendous. So we are very lucky to have a panel of experts with us today, mothers of children with spina bifida. And so I am going to ask them, I'll go around and ask them to introduce themselves, and then I will leave you in the very capable hands of our board chair, Aimee Bois, to lead the discussion tonight. So I'm going to go in order of boxes on my screen. So Aimee Williamson, I'll start with you. And if you could just introduce yourself and do a little brag on your child, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Jean. My name is Aimee Williamson. I'm a mother of a 21-year-old daughter with spina bifida. She has a lipomyelomeningocele, so it's generally a relatively mild form, but she's had a lot of challenges following her growth spurts in her teenage years. She is, as I said, 21, so she's in college at Northeastern studying psychology right now.
Awesome, thank you. And Jen Leidner.
Hi, my name is Jen Leidner, and I'm the mother of a 10-year-old boy with myelomeningocele. I also have a 14-year-old daughter who's typically developing. My 10-year-old is going into 5th grade, and he was matched with a service dog about 3 months ago. It's a mobility service dog, so he walks with her, and he's absolutely loving it. Today, he was just recertified. He passed his recertification, or they did, and now they're good for a year.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Ginny Briggs.
Hi, I'm Ginny Briggs, and I have a daughter who is 20 years old with myelomeningocele. She is also in college. She is at the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. So she moved 3 hours or 2.5 hours away from home to go to college. So there are some thoughts about that, but it's been working out really well. She's a music industry major and plays 2 instruments and is learning all about the business end of being in the music industry, as well as being a musician. So she's doing extremely well, has been on the dean's list several times, and really adjusting well, and has a lot of friends. So we're very proud of her.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Aimee Bois.
Hi, everybody. Aimee Bois here. I am the mother to a son, Tyler Bois, who's 15, soon to be 16 in December. I cannot believe that. He's going to be a sophomore in high school at Portsmouth High School. He has myelomeningocele. He's like an L1, I believe. And he is enjoying tennis, just relaxing this summer, trying to just be. I think that's kind of the best way to describe that. Excited for his new year, heading into high school in 10th grade. Hopefully we'll restore a little bit of normalcy to school again for our teenagers. But he's excited about that. He loves wheelchair tennis. He loves to dance. He loves YouTube. And he loves to, I think, get into funny conversations with his younger brother, my other son, Andrew, who's 11. So it's always never a dull moment in the Bois household.
Thank you. Well, do you want to get us started tonight?
Sure. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us. Those of you that are going to be watching back, this is kind of like coffee talk amongst spina bifida parents. And then we thought it would be really fun to share our experiences with you all, in hopes to let you know that you're not alone. We are going through this together. I like to think of us as a big community, and the more that we share with you all, I think the more that we learn from each other and also help us through, a lot of perhaps the challenging moments, and then celebrate the good moments. So to tip that off, I definitely wanted to talk about, as parents, when we first set out to have children, we weren't really educated on how to parent a child with spina bifida. There's no handbook, there's no guideline. It's a lot of it is learning as we go. I know for myself, that's what I had to do and educate myself. One of you, and I'm not going to name any names, if you'd like to share a little bit about like, how do you feel like in the beginning when you had your child, how were you able to parent effectively? Like, how did you treat your child? How did you go about raising a child with spina bifida? And sometimes starting from the beginning helps those, especially those new parents that are new to this entire role. I see you, Jen.
Well, I've got the youngest one on the call. It was just, he's so much like a regular child, and so many of the fundamentals come from a regular, I shouldn't say regular, like my daughter who came first.
Mm-hmm.
I have learned to become more flexible and more adaptable and more resourceful, for certain. I never knew that I'd be able to do the things, juggle the schedule that I do juggle. I've had to make life altering choices for him, for his medical treatment and for his therapies, and learn to provide some of the nursing services that he requires. But he's highly independent, and we focus a lot on teaching him independence and encouraging independence, because he is really a very socially typical kid. So we need to facilitate that independence to maintain that social typicalness, if that's a word.
Yeah. Yeah. You touched upon something I think is really important, is that I think the most important thing is that you raise your spina bifida child just like any other child, with expectations, with all the same hopes and dreams that you would have for any other child. I know sometimes we have a tendency, it can be easy to get bogged down sort of in the details of spina bifida, the weeds of it. But at the end of the day, these are our children. These are children just like any other child. They'll have developmental milestones. They might reach them on time, they might not, but they're going to beat to their own drum. And as long as we keep bringing them on, treating them just like we would any other child, I think that's where we start to really see success.
I'd agree with that too. I think I think a lot of it is reinforcing other things that you'd experience anyways. I mean, you've got to figure out how to help them find their strengths, help them, overcome challenges. It's just that sometimes the challenges are bigger and there's new things to figure out. I paused when you first asked though, because when I think back to my early years, they were quite different with Lena, because she, her particular type of spina bifida, most of the problems didn't come until later. So, when we first found out about her diagnosis, it was kind of presented as more of, I don't want to say short term, but it was more limited in scope. And so it was kind of like you overcome certain challenges and then time goes on, and there weren't a lot of differences between raising her and raising my son. It wasn't until later on during the growth spurt years that the challenges emerged, and we had to kind of adapt and learn kind of a new normal in our house.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, does that make it more challenging though, when you're going right along and everything is easy breezy, and then all of a sudden, things start to get tough. There are things that you've never had to deal with before. And I think the older that your child gets, the realization of having spina bifida gets a lot more real. How was Lena able to deal with that?
Pretty well, actually. I mean, I think it's hard no matter what. I don't think there's any time that's easier necessarily. I think she adapted quite well, but it was a bit of a challenge. You have to shift things over. I think, sometimes in some ways it might be easier if you're growing up with this and that's your normal from day one. But in other ways, it was probably easier on us in that our older son was older. And so I didn't have the same challenges that some young parents probably have, in the sense of trying to juggle, a bunch of kids under the age of 5 and one with a medical challenge. I did a little bit, but it was more limited in scope. And by the time she hit her challenges, my other son was older. So I just think I think in general with disabilities, every family is a little bit different, and they kind of have to figure out how to make this work with their own family, and we can all learn from each other, but a lot of it's about resilience and overcoming challenges and finding what works for you.
Mhm.
I think my story is starts before Grace was born. I found out that I was carrying a child with spina bifida when I was 20 weeks pregnant. We were in Boston at the Brigham, and so we were right away led through those complicated hallways over to Children's Hospital, where we met 2 of the staff at the Spina Bifida clinic. And that was life-changing because it was such devastating news and so scary. We really didn't understand what we were looking at. When we went to meet the staff there, we met a neurosurgeon, and we met then the coordinating nurse for the clinic. And, you know, their attitude is so different. It's like, well, it's going to be fine. This is what we do. We have a clinic every Wednesday. It's one-stop shopping. You see everybody. We take care of things. They go off and they have a great life. And it was just so refreshing to hear that, because everyone had the saddest faces everywhere we looked, that we just didn't know what to do. We were just frightened. So that's what gave us, I think, the fuel we needed to go forward and look at this in a positive light. So the next several months were spent in preparation by mostly educating ourselves. And I just think that education helps so much. It solves the problems in your head. It prepares you for what will come and what might come. And it was just so great to hear that there was a team in place to deal with all those challenges if they came and when they came.
Right.
And it's also just part of, I think, who we are. When we do see problems, we do tend to kind of just tackle them and figure them out together and deal with it. But when Grace was born, we had, our attitude was nicely in place. We knew what we were going to do. We knew how we were going to handle it. So our years and our early years were spent just simply managing the issues as they came up, going to those specialists, getting the things taken care of. But meanwhile, also doing regular normal things, going to preschool, taking her to preschool, seeing what she could physically do, going into the pool, going to amusement parks. Our son was 2 years older, so we all did things as a family. And so we were just a nice little unit. And that's, emotionally, that's very helpful for not only us, but of course our child, who is just looking at us for guidance and just felt like, yeah, this is my family. This is my gang. This is what we do together. And it worked out really well early on. So I think it's all about preparation and education and not being just don't get so worried. It's going to be okay. We're very lucky, actually. I always think of ourselves as lucky. There are conditions out there, illnesses, chronic conditions that families have to deal with that they don't know the answers. There isn't someplace they can go. There's no one to answer the questions. And we're lucky. We've got all kinds of specialists around. Of course, depending on what part of the country you live in, that can be different. But I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, I completely agree. And interestingly enough, to piggyback off of what you said, like our experience in the beginning was similar to yours, Ginny, where, I mean, when you get the diagnosis, it is extremely scary. It was my first baby. Tyler is my firstborn, and to get that diagnosis, and they give you the worst case scenario on that day. You're literally in complete and utter fear, feeling desperate. And then the next thing you know, we were out in California at the time, because Tyler was born at Chalk, Children's Hospital of Orange County. They hooked us up with the clinic there. And you're right, when you meet with the professionals that run the Spina Bifida clinic and people that are well-versed in Spina Bifida, they gave us hope. Like after we met with them, after we met with Tyler's fantastic neurosurgeon, I had hope. I had a plan. I had a way to move forward, which I think is critical because I needed to plan for his success. Like that's what I needed to do to make sure that his delivery went well, that I had the best doctors there when he was born to give him the very best chances that he deserved. So I completely agree. And then I was able to enjoy my pregnancy. You know, I was able to actually then enjoy being pregnant and not, I was always worried. It's in the back of your mind. It is with any pregnancy. But I was able to have a lot more peace of mind knowing that I had a wonderful team behind me and that support. So, you know, and for us too, Tyler, when he was young, oh my goodness, we had literally one sort of subset rare thing happen to Tyler after the other. And he's actually had a lot of things happen that is not really common in the spina bifida world. And we've still, even with that being said, we've still been able to not let spina bifida completely define our lives. It's always going to be a part of it. It's a part of who he is, but we do all the fun things that every other family does. Just like you said, amusement parks, dance parties, barbecues, camping, vacations, sleepaway camp, tennis. I mean, water parks, you name it, we make it happen. It might be a little bit more challenging at times. We have to adapt to our environment. We have to adapt to our situation. But you know what? Our entire family has become stronger for it, more resilient. And, you know, I can honestly say that, and I would tell the parents listening, is that I know it's tough, but I'm telling you, it all will be worth it. And that these kids and these adults with spina bifida can have fantastic lives. I really, truly believe that.
You know, it's really funny. It makes me think of something that Grace said once. I think she was maybe 10 or 11 or something, where somebody asked her what was wrong with her. And yeah, I mean, she's always dealt with those kinds of questions, of course. And she answered the question. She described it as best she could at that age. But now I've lost my train of thought. She said, it's called spina bifida. She said quickly, but it's really cool because I get to do lots of cool things. So she was like already with what happened that was positive in her life. And she had a smile on her face. Like, I go to camps, we travel to California. We're always traveling because we went to national conferences. So she's like, yeah, I'm always on a plane going somewhere or doing something.
Yeah, you touched upon a really sensitive topic. Like I hear a lot of parents talking about this often. I think in the beginning, when we do get those types of questions that in our mind, we're like, geez, that's a little rude. But I think parents sometimes in the beginning will just snap back at people because they just don't know what to say and they're just upset. You know, they haven't been able to deal with that yet. What advice would you give to parents to help their kids field some of those questions? Because I know my son is not a huge fan of the stairs. You know, he's like, why don't they have to stare at me? You know, like, can't they come over and talk to me? And, you know, the parents shush the kids and tell them, don't say that. God forbid you like interacted in that way. Like what advice would you give to these parents to help their kids answer these questions better, or even the parents themselves?
Well, Lena, I think she's actually figured out on her own, but I watch her reaction and she has started just being very frank with them. You know, if people ask, she just looks at them very clearly and says, I have a disability. And some, you know, most of the time she doesn't even say more than that, you know, if she wants to, or if, you know, she will, but it's answering the question straightforward and she doesn't have to say more than she wants ever. So she's figured that out. It seems to work for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Because having a disability, I think one of the things I know that we're trying to do, you know, with Spagni is to develop a normalcy around the word disability. It shouldn't have a negative connotation to it. And that's society's perception. But the thing is that, and I tell Tyler, like, you have spina bifida. Spina bifida is a disability. And it's your choice how much you want to offer to people. It's not your job to tell them everything they need to know. It is absolutely your choice with what you want to share with people.
Yeah, I think Grace has put a lot more thought into that the last couple of years, you know, getting some independence, going to college and dealing with things on her own. She's really put a lot of thought into this now. It's not that she's come up with an answer, but because people never ask the question the same way. So it's really hard to have a quick comeback when you're not sure how they're going to phrase it, or you're taken off guard or something. But I think I heard her mention this on one of the other roundtables, that you've been seeing people in wheelchairs more often on TV and in various comedies and dramas and things like that. And there was a character on a show, I think it's Superstore, where one of the characters is in a wheelchair, and somebody said, "Why are you in a wheelchair?" And he said, "Well, that's kind of private. I don't really want to talk about it." And that's perfectly fine. Just shut it down. Like, that's really personal information.
Mhm.
I'm not going to ask you how much you weigh. I'm not going to ask you how much you make.
Yeah.
Why are you asking me? This information is none of your business.
Josh does not like answering that question at 10. He's decided he doesn't like telling people anything about his disability, because he'll just stall and change the subject. And then he changes the subject like blatantly, like go get lost. But seriously, if he knows he has a disability, but he doesn't see it as a limitation.
Exactly.
He is a part-time wheelchair user. He walks with crutches. I mean, he recently filled out an application for something, and one of the questions was, how does your disability limit you? And he's like, it doesn't. I can do it whatever I want. I just have to do it a little differently. So that's kind of how we roll here.
That's awesome. I think, for Tyler, my son, being 15 is a challenging age. I'm not going to lie. The hormones are raging. He's trying to fit into a really large high school where, again, second school where he's the only individual in the entire high school who uses a wheelchair. Would you think it'd be, wow, this is like a 3-floor school. It's huge. Not anybody presents similar to him. He definitely is not a fan of having to talk a lot about it, and not really a fan either of the stares, which I tell him, people stare at me too, Tyler. Like, people stare at everyone. People stare at what they don't understand, or if they have curiosity about somebody or what have you. And I said, that's human nature. And I think that's one of the things where I think our kids do develop a little bit thicker skin from that standpoint. And I tell him, like, in that situation, it is important to shake it off, but I tell him, the more you are personable, and if they do come up to you and if you just say, "Hey, I'm Tyler. You want to ask me a question? I'm Tyler. What's up? You want to chat?" I was like, you can you can redirect the conversation. They don't have to have control of the conversation. You can take control of it. I do tell him often that, because I was like, that brings the control back to you, and perhaps you can steer that conversation to something that you feel would be in a more appropriate conversation for you, and maybe you guys would be friends. So I try that tactic. Tough though with teenagers when they just want to fit in with everybody. I think that's kind of one of the toughest things.
We often hear a lot with the little kids. Often people, even adults, will ask, or kids will ask me questions about him. And that's something that people are probably running into.
Yeah.
I usually make sure I defer back to my son now that he's old enough to answer. I think that I'm not sure why people assume that they should ask parents rather than the individuals themselves, but that's a common situation.
Yes. Yeah. Tyler's had that many, like in school. So if we, I'm sure there are going to be people watching this back where their children perhaps have a paraprofessional that work with them. And Tyler would have a paraprofessional who would just help him navigate through his day. They don't sit next to him at school. They're usually in the back of the classroom just in case he needed extra help or what have you. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely many times where kids would go and talk to the para about Tyler. And luckily Tyler's had some pretty good paras where they'd be like, listen, you go ask Tyler. Like, don't ask me, ask him. He'll trust me. He'll answer it for you. And the more they did that, the more they fostered his independence and also fostered those relationships with the other kids. The less they saw the disability, the less they saw the wheelchair, and they felt a lot more comfortable with chatting with Tyler. So that's a really, really valid point, is that it's always people first. It's not, you don't go like, just because somebody might not be sure what that person knows, why are we making those assumptions? I always tell people, think about that. Because really you should never assume anything about an individual. Go and talk to that individual themselves. It's the best way to figure it out. And I know that we're going to have a lot of young families too watching this back. I know navigating through school, especially in the beginning when parents are getting their kids into school, can be daunting. Knowing like if your child's going to need services, or how the teacher is going to be able to respond to your child. And I wanted to ask you guys, and maybe you could use an example of a really good, maybe like a really good teacher that you remember who really did a nice job of fostering inclusion for that classroom. Like, I'm not sure who would want to answer this, but could you give an example of how like a classroom where your child excelled and did the best? What did that look like for her or for him?
We've had a lot of luck with team taught classes. We've had some wonderful team taught classes that have really made sure that my son is never singled out. He's, even when he's going places, the kids are used to, if he's going someplace and he goes ahead or he goes behind, usually he goes with the class now, but when he was going separately, they always sent him with a buddy or two. So he was never alone.
Mm-hmm.
So that really was nice. And there were times that the teachers would actually go to bat when somebody else would propose something that they didn't think was right. And the teachers would be like, no, this is not inclusion. That's not how we're doing it. It's not always like that, but we definitely have had some teachers who have always made sure that he was with the group.
Gotcha. That's good. So did you find, would you say a majority of the teachers that Josh has had are good at fostering inclusion, like are good at making sure that he's a part of projects and all the work and treated like everybody else in the classroom? Or do you think that has been a bit of a struggle?
He is always included. Sometimes I feel like they set the bar a little low,
Mm-hmm.
and that bugs me. And I often have that discussion with them. I have to remind them to hold the bar high, and challenge him and keep him on his toes, and know that he knows how to work the system. It's not just all them. It's also, it falls back to him because he knows how to work the system.
Right.
So that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
How about you guys?
I have to say that I didn't experience a lot of problems when Grace was younger. She was pretty mobile when she was little. She wore braces and she just kind of had a little staggering walk. And that's gotten harder as she's gotten older and she's needed walkers and wheelchairs sometimes. But when she was younger, I think that had a lot to do with how she was treated because she was still walking with everybody else. However, I will say in the 4th and 5th grade, she did struggle with math. She was in, this little pull-out group, and the school was pretty big. And so, it was a good sized group in there where they were teaching them math. And one day I was looking what she was doing and I was just shocked that she was just adding single digit numbers. And I thought, that is way behind what everybody else is doing. Why is she doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't understand it. And they just said, well, that's what we're doing and that's what she can do. It's like, well, I'm sure she can do more than that. And why is she still doing that 6 months later? So that was kind of a conversation, and I was pretty upset about it. And so sometimes I felt as if they just made the assumption that she couldn't go beyond a certain level and they were just going to keep her where they thought she should be without really knowing or testing her. But then fortunately a charter school opened up in our city. So we were able to move her in the 6th grade. And they were shocked. They at her IEP meeting, they said, what are you doing that for? You know, that's not going to work. It's like, well, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but we're going to try. You know, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe she'll have to come back here, but we'll see. But it turned out she had the best education ever because she had her own teacher 2 periods a day for math, with one other student who became a very good friend of hers. And she was about 1 chapter behind the rest of the class for the next several years, you know, doing algebra and geometry and even a little bit of pre-calculus. So it was, you know, she wasn't a star student, but she was keeping up. She was doing all right.
Yeah. That's great. You know, we sort of had that same experience with Tyler. Tyler struggled a little bit with math too. I feel like it's the abstract that he struggles a little bit with. And we definitely, I had to advocate pretty strongly for Tyler because they would sort of make assumptions like he needed more visuals and more tactile visuals and just a little bit different way of teaching. Not that he couldn't learn the material, was that he just needed a different style of it to be presented. And the challenge is that he had a math teacher who had been doing it a very, very long time, who was not willing to adapt to the way that he needed to learn. Luckily, we figured that out early on and got him a private tutor, which I know is expensive and I know not everybody can do that, but it made a huge difference because once he got in with someone that figured out how he learned best, he didn't feel behind anymore. He didn't feel like the stupid kid in math. He knew, hey, it's just about the way that it's presented to me. And then after he was able to get a better confidence about it, the next thing I know, he's doing so much better now. He has confidence in it. He doesn't put off his math work till like the last minute. He actually does it first. So I think, and I know, because I talk with a lot of other parents with like, you know, ages 10 to 18, don't keep pushing your kids for regular education classes. You know, don't let the schools make assumptions of where your kids need to be. And just because they have spina bifida does not mean that, you know, that they need to have lesser caseload or work. I've always found that let the child dictate that. Don't make assumptions about that child. And yes, they may have areas that they need to be adapted to them, different learning styles perhaps, but that is something that really should be the responsibility of the school. That's what we found.
I would also just add that some of the challenges are just around the lost time in school from medical appointments and surgeries and all of that. That was a tremendous struggle for us certain years where, I mean, if I look back on middle school, she missed an entire year of middle school when you added it all up across those 3 years. And how do you kind of make up for that? And it's challenging. And I think the teachers that were the most inclusive were the ones that could think a little bit about the individual needs. It did mean more work, you know, because there was a kind of a difficult balance between trying to make her make up everything that she had missed. Like if you're out of school for 3 months, how do you ever make all of that up on top of being in class and learning, you know, as you move forward? But at the same time, if you just have her not do something at all and just say, okay, well, you don't have to do it, then you're kind of leaping chapters and chapters ahead and trying to, you know, kind of backtrack. And math in particular is one that's a good example that's difficult to miss chunks of and then be doing out of order. So there were definitely challenges around that over time. And, you know, like you said, you know, good tutors help, just teachers willing to take that extra time and really think about each individual's needs are important.
Yeah, you brought up a really, really valid point, is the surgeries, because we went through that same thing. And you know, for Tyler, he had a spinal fusion, literally the second half of his 8th grade year, entering into COVID. So not only was he recovering from a spinal fusion, then he was having to go into remote learning for the first time, which that was like everybody was trying to figure out what was going on. And what I've always told Tyler is that, you know, we actually agree with the teachers. You can kind of work out an understanding with them and say, we really want to get to the root of what he knows. And that can also be accomplished through less quantity of math problems. And so we would literally have the teacher circle the math problems that would tell them what he knew without him having to do so much quantity of it. And for us, that really helped. And we were able to add that into his IEP under accommodations so that he could still get through the math course and still get the concepts that he needed to move forward. And the school has been great about that. We've had to do that on 2 occasions where it was almost like a little bit of a self-paced math program that we did, especially in high school with remote. And then that allows the child to not feel so anxious about being behind when they are recovering from surgery. Because I think if there's anything that I have learned is that it's not a race to the finish line. And yes, as parents, we all want our child to finish high school in 4 years, but you know what? If it takes your child 5 years and they're really getting the education that they need, that's okay too. That's absolutely okay. So I think sometimes we all get so caught up in we've got to do this in 4 years. We got to do everything just like everybody else. But at the same token, our kids go through sometimes a lot more than other kids do. So give yourself grace. It's not a race, and just sort of like know that oftentimes the school systems will work with you when you bring forth different ideas to help your child be successful.
Another thing that really worked for us was I had been to a conference, one of the national conferences, where there was a wonderful presentation about executive function problems in kids with spina bifida. And the researcher had created this beautiful table, this chart that listed the issues that kids with spina bifida tend to have in school, difficulties organizing things and things that require stages and steps. And he'd categorized it all. And so he had kind of identified where those areas were that would help teachers identify what the problems were if the child was falling behind or having difficulty. And then in the same column, the strategy for how to deal with it. So I gave that chart to my daughter's special education teacher, the one that taught her math every day. She was very interested. She really liked having that. And we even invited her to come to one of our local regional conferences that we had hosted, that Spagni hosted. And she came. She spent the day there and went to those sessions and learned. She really wanted to do better. She really wanted to understand those things. And I tried to remember to give that to every teacher that would even look at it. But that is one way you can advocate for your child. I can't remember if it's on our website or not, but if people are interested in that, we can certainly make that happen.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, on the Spina Bifida Association national page. Yeah, I went under the resources and I printed them out for our IEP meetings to make sure every person that would be working with Tyler would honestly have much better understanding of spina bifida, but then also, like you said, that really across the board, we see challenges with executive functioning. Now, granted, they're varied. Some people are more severe than others, but it certainly helps. And it helps the teachers to understand better how they learn, especially if there's a particular area that they might struggle in more than another. So that's a great option to provide for our families so that they can arm themselves and then give it to the school. Another thing that I did too is that I got Stacy Cook on board. So Stacy Cook is, I think she's the head of complex care now at Boston Children's Hospital, developmental pediatrician. And, during COVID, sort of like the second half of the year, Tyler's freshman year, we were just starting to feel sort of like the squeeze, like the squeeze of getting it all done. Trying to like manage your way when nothing that year was normal. She got on the call with me with Tyler's case manager at school, and then with the special education coordinator, and just kind of explained just different things that Tyler had been going through that year and how the school could help impact him to have a good transition back to school in the fall. And that is something that doctors or therapists oftentimes will do. They will help you to advocate with the school. And I would encourage any parent that if they're struggling with their school system, to perhaps think about bringing on a specialist, because they certainly, it was well received. And we just felt much better once we got off that call with where we were headed for the fall coming up.
Yeah, and I almost feel as if we need an entire different roundtable to talk about IEPs. I think we've all dealt with that and problems with it, getting services you need, having services cut, etc.
Yeah.
But we're the biggest advocates for them. And I'm sure many of us with school-age children have had to deal with that. It's not easy.
No. Well, ladies, last but not least, because this, I really want to leave, especially when we have younger parents that I'm sure are going to watch this back. We kind of touched upon it, like Ginny and I mentioned a little bit, like from the very early onset when we found out we were having a child with spina bifida. If you could give just a few words of encouragement to a family that was just diagnosed with spina bifida, what would those words be? What would you want them to know?
I'll start, and I'm just going to give you Lena's words. She has told me multiple times that she has gotten more from her disability than it has taken from her. She thinks it's brought on, similar to what Ginny said earlier, it has given her opportunities. I think it's made her more empathetic. It's made her stronger in some ways. She's found a passion for work related to healthcare and disability, and she's still trying to figure that out a little bit, but I think it's really done a lot for her. But what I would probably say in terms of advice is get connected. I think the one thing we didn't do up front that I wish we had done far sooner is find an organization like SPAGNI. We didn't live out here at the time, but when we were in the middle of the tough times, it was harder to get connected. And if we had done that up front and had that, because the difference was really remarkable. I mean, Ginny and her daughter were two of the first people we met at the first event, and they're just friendships that have continued on ever since that day.
That's awesome.
Absolutely, I agree. Making those connections as early as possible are so important. Just like with Aimee and Lena, when I found out I was expecting Grace and we met the folks from Children's Hospital, we were put in touch with another family. And they are, I don't know if I should name names. And they had a child who's 2 years old with spina bifida. So we went up to their house. We drove up to their house. We called them, of course. We wouldn't just show up at the door. But we went up and met them, and we all talked. And, they were also expecting another child. I was pregnant with Grace, and we have known them all these years, and we've both been very involved with SPAGNI. That was huge. We were able to ask questions. What's it like? She's 2 years old. What is she like? What is she doing? What is she? Anything you can tell us about what to expect. And she was, of course, always 2 years ahead. So we're always there asking what to expect when she's 16, 18, etc. So that was very helpful. But then, of course, being part of the clinic, we were also around that same time getting introduced to the Spina Bifida Association. So we started going to the gatherings. We were on the board. We did all kinds of things. And it's just been such a wonderful light in our lives to be part of the Spina Bifida Association, and everyone we've met over the years. Some we don't see anymore, but we always remember them. And we've just gotten such useful information from everybody we've interacted with of all ages. And it's been great. It's made us a healthier family, happier, healthier, more positive, not just Grace, but the whole family. So that's what I would say to young families or those that are expecting a child with spina bifida. Get connected as soon as you can, and you will find the most supportive, loving community that you would ever find anywhere.
Mhm.
I agree. Yeah, definitely get connected. But I was talking to my kids about doing this over dinner tonight, and they said, or actually my daughter shared, she said, I always thought kids with disabilities were different and just sweeter, and like she didn't know that a child with a disability, a sibling with a disability, was still a sibling, and your child is still your child, and they're going to be who they are. They're going to have good days, they're going to have bad days, they're just going to be part of your family, and just be who they're going to be. And they're going to have their kind moments, and they're going to have their monstrous moments, and it's just they'll have their talents, they'll have their things that they're not so good at, and you'll just find your way that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Like they're not going to break. Don't treat them like a delicate bird. And I know that's so interesting that you say that because I have an 11-year-old boy and then Tyler's 15. And trust me, in the early years, it was like WWE SmackDown at my house on a regular basis. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's how Tyler broke his leg when he was 11 in a very challenging wrestling match with his brother because his brother didn't treat him different. His brother treated him just like everybody else. And we touched upon this earlier about how important it is to raise your child like a child, like anybody would. Same goals, same aspirations, same dreams for them. On diagnosis day, I wish someone could have hugged me and said, listen, it's gonna be okay. Breathe, don't hold your breath because you're afraid, because that's when you get the wind knocked out of you, because that's how I felt. When we got the diagnosis, it was like, boom, straight kick. I could not breathe. Take that deep breath, right? Take the time to arm yourself with information, get with the specialists because they are going to give you hope for your child, and know that you've got a support system. You can get through this. And I absolutely agree with you. Getting in touch with other parents who have been through it, who understand, you're going to feel that sense of community, that love, and then also know that you're not alone. You're not out on your own island by yourself. There are other people who are right there with you. So, yeah, like a big hug for the people on diagnosis day and moving past that, but also to know that you're going to do it. You can do it. And your child is forever going to be probably your best friend. Like that's what Tyler and I always joke about that. You might not like me right now, but hopefully down the road, you'll thank me. All right.
This has been fantastic, ladies. I can't thank you enough for being so open and candid about your experiences. I think that that's really helpful to people who are not as far along the journey as you all are. And, for people who are watching and learning maybe for the first time or early on in their experience, I just want to reinforce that this is the leadership of our organization, former board members, current board members, and throughout all of the programs that we're doing this month, hopefully some future board members as well. All of you are so invested in helping everybody have their best experience. And so we do have a lot of resources available on our website. I took some notes about some things that I think we need to add based on tonight's conversation, as well as some topics that we need to add to our upcoming conference in October. But I do want, especially the young parents, to know that we do have a lot of resources available. We have a parent-to-parent mentoring program. We have a new diagnosis day brochure, and there are sections called "It's Going to Be Okay" and "You Are Not Alone." Exactly what I heard all of you say tonight. So I truly want to thank all of you for doing this. I want to encourage anybody that's watching that has a question to reach out to us. If we don't know the answer, we're going to help you find it. This is a great community. You truly are not alone. You will add value to the community and you will receive value back. So please please join us. And again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm quite sure everybody that's watching does too.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you.
Everyone, it was great to talk to you.
Yes.
Take care. Bye-bye.